What is going on, Diablo 2 fans? Dobrunsky here, and I am super excited to be making this video. The changes that I'm going to be covering in this blog post are probably some of the biggest changes that Diablo 2 Resurrected has ever received, period, with the exception of maybe the synergy system and rune words. And that is largely because of the new feature that we're going to be testing, which is Sunder Charms, which, in a nutshell, they break monsters' immunities. So they only bring monsters' res down to 95. I'm going to cover it in more detail in a little bit, but it's going to sort of shift the meta away from Infinity, even though that will still be a Kingpin rune word. Fire damage dealing characters now, if you get a Fire Sunder Charm, will be able to break some immunities. So you won't be stuck with like hard locked immunities like Venom Lords in the Chaos Sanctuary, which I think is very interesting. It's going to shift the meta quite a bit, and I do think that some items will sort of change in value. So if you think about like the Poison Sunder Charm or the Fire Sunder Charm, to try and counteract that massive negative poison res or negative fire res, I think you're going to see certain rune words or items sort of like skyrocket in value. So Flickering Flame, Alder's Boots, Hotspur Boots, that'll help sort of kind of counteract the negative fire res. And then Sandstorm Trex with the massive poison res will sort of kind of help counteract the negative poison resistance. So a lot to cover in this blog post. We're going to go over everything from the ladder launch date, the Sunder Charms, some things that I like about them, and then some concerns that I have overall. But again, I do want to stress that this is literally like I am recording this video 10 minutes after this blog post was put up. So obviously we'll get a chance to test, sort of tweak or adjust values or make comments on what we think might be broken. And then that'll probably be taken into consideration. So one final tweak, and then we'll get the launch of the ladder, which we're just going to jump into that right now. Season 2 will begin on October the 6th. So additional details on ladder Season 2, including launch timing, will be communicated in an upcoming Diablo 2 Resurrected blog. We cannot wait for players to begin the race to collect loads of experience and loot while slaying demons and climbing the leaderboard. This is really exciting for me. I think I'm going to play as a Fire Druid and try and actually push for 99 for the first time. And that is, well, not for the first time. For the first time, I'm battling it. I have achieved it on single player, but I think that Terror Zones and the ability to break fire immunities, I think that certain fire damage dealing characters are going to excel, and the Fire Druid is definitely going to be one of them. So it looks like Terror Zones have received 2 minor updates. The first is the addition of 2 new areas, which includes the Pit and the City of the Damned. So these areas, I think, are much more suited for being a candidate to be a Terror Zone because there's more monster density and they're relatively easy to find. That is an important factor. Like Terror Zones, you basically want a full clear monsters. You're not sort of isolating champions and boss packs. Well, you can actually do that Magic Find style, but if you're trying to push for experience, you really want monster density for full clears. And some of the areas that they removed, which if we scroll down here, they include the Maggot Lair, the Harem and Palace Cellar, and Lower Kurast. These 3 zones had pretty poor monster density, in particular Lower Kurast. It was horrible. Maggot Lair and Harem and Palace Cellar was okay. I don't think it was great, but I don't really miss seeing these areas removed, but I think the Pit and the City of the Damned was actually a really good addition. And to quote the devs specifically on these changes, the dominant driver of these changes was mob density. Fully clearing a zone is more beneficial in a terrorized zone, but this becomes less efficient if the density of a zone is too low. Rather than adjust mob density, which would have ramifications on melee builds, we opted instead to remove zones with lighter mob density. The removal of the Maggot Lair, Harem Palace Cellar was also to address terror zone playability in close quarter zones with doors. While zones with doors have always been a bit quirky, we do not wish to change them, opting instead to maintain the original design feeling. Instead, we have added 2 new zones that promote our intended benefits to players when terrorized. So moving on to the Sunder Charm section of this video, I imagine a lot of you guys skipped right to the segment, and I don't blame you because it is, in my opinion, the single biggest meta-shifting change to the game outside of the introduction of the synergy system and rune words, which I think is fantastic because it's going to allow other characters the ability to magic find other locations, and it's going to shift some of the meta away from Infinity. Not entirely, because Infinity and like sources of low res like Plague or Curse Necro, they still will be like meta rune words, but you can at least now stack like Fire Facets, Flickering Flame, and then farm Chaos Sanctuary as a Fire Druid. You're not forced to also make Infinity on top of that, so I think that's a good compromise. They also apply a massive negative resistance, depending on the charm that you drop, to your character. So it's not just a straight power creep. That's when I talked about at the beginning of the video how I think certain items to sort of counteract these negative res penalties will just sort of have more value. So a couple of key points to mention about these Sunder Charms. First is that they only apply the negative resistance penalty to immune monsters. It specifically states that. So if you have a monster that has like negative 30 fire res and it's not fire immune, you're not applying an additional negative penalty. It's only for monsters that have a different immunity type. So if it's cold, poison, magic, fire, etc., that's the only time a Sunder Charm will apply. Now they state specifically here that a Sunder is applied before other resistance reducing modifiers and only affects non-players. This is very important, so if you have a fire immune monster, Sunder will break it down to 95, and then you will apply your negative resistance after from like Conviction on Infinity or lower resistance from Plague, etc. They don't specifically state here, but I'm assuming that it's just going to apply at full effect. I don't think it's going to apply at that 1/5 efficiency. It might, I don't know. I guess some more testing will sort of clarify that. But the second segment here only affects non-players. This is super important, so this is not going to affect PvP. So this is the best way to compromise both player communities instead of like that argument of we wanted to make the Boazon better for PvM, but PvP was really upset because it just made the Boa like way stronger compared to other PvP characters. This negates that. There's going to be no issues between the PvP and PvM communities, so that's really good. Another key important point here, and I did mention and beg and ask for this, which is awesome. I don't know if it's specifically for my feedback, but they state that these unique charms will only drop from terrorized monsters of rare, unique, or champion difficulty. So again, that was something that I really wanted, like new content associated with Terror Zones. But the fact that these specific Sunder Charms only drop from terrorized monsters, I think that's really cool. So there is actually a very interesting negative resistance penalty that is also applied to these charms, which I think is great. You can't just stack tons of these charms. There is a consequence to using them. So for example, if you wanted to play as a fire boa / cold boa, stacking both of these charms, you would have to overcome negative 75% cold res and negative 75% fire. So you already have negative 100% penalty moving into hell difficulty, which you're almost doubling that penalty. So that's where I talked about how I think some specific items like Alder's Boots and Flickering Flame are going to kind of skyrocket in value to sort of counteract the negative penalty. But I'm actually a really big fan of just these negative penalties in general because they just kind of make you shift up your gear, and it's not just a power jump or increase for every character. Now specifically, magic is a negative 50% resistance penalty. Physical, you're increasing the damage you receive by 25%. One thing that I do want to point out specifically about the physical Sunder Charm is that I feel like it benefits a physical Boazon or Throw Barb a lot more than it does a melee, like full-on melee character like Whirlwind or Frenzy. Just because increasing the physical damage you receive by 25%, I think, is very rough for like a Whirlwind Druid that's like spinning through mobs getting hit. But if you're hanging way back from a distance with multi-shot, you're going to just buff Boazons, like you're buffing ranged melee or ranged physical damage, but actual like get in monsters' faces melee is, in my opinion, taking a bit of a hit. So for cold, lightning, fire, and poison, it's just a negative 75% resistance penalty, which is interesting. I think that like poison will be really cool complement to a poison Javazon that's sort of a hybrid with Lightning Fury. A lot of interesting stuff. The Flame Rift, I'm going to run a ton. Like I said, I'm going to go Fire Druid. It is going to be an amazing update to the game, in my opinion. So I want to wrap up this video by just covering some of the things that I really like about the Sunder Charms, as well as a couple potential concerns that I have. Again, we need to test this in PTR, like I haven't had an opportunity yet. Things may change, there's an opportunity, so just voice those concerns, but don't necessarily scream bloody murder. But things that I do like, got a big list here. The first is that I think fire builds really get a chance to shine. In my opinion, they've always struggled. Like, the introduction of Stony Tombs was sort of like them getting a little bit of love, but Sunder Charms is something that fire damage dealing characters, I think, have required forever. A drawback to using these charms in the negative resistance, I really like that. So it's not just mindlessly stacking these Sunder Charms. There is a little bit of a penalty you need to overcome, so I think that's really well thought out. And again, I like the idea that it's going to shift meta in terms of rune words that are used and item values. So again, stacking that fire res or poison res, or maybe not necessarily being forced to use Infinity, maybe using your wealth to make a Phoenix first instead of Infinity for a Fire Druid because you can get negative res from Ravenlore. I just like that sort of shifting of meta. I think it's really interesting. The final thing that I like is, again, no penalty is being applied to PvP, so PvP and PvM communities can give each other a big hug because this is going to make PvM a much better experience, but it will not affect the PvP community. So I think it's just the best of both worlds. Now, there are, however, a few concerns that I have with these charms. And again, I do want to stress that things will change based on PTR feedback. But the first initial concern that I have is that I feel like the physical Sunder Charm benefits ranged physical damage a lot more than it does like actual melee. So multi-shot Boazon is going to get much more benefit from this charm compared to a Whirlwind Barbarian. That's just because Decrep from Reaper's Toll is such a consistent way to break physical immunities that I just don't really see like a Whirlwind Barb getting a ton of benefit. The second is the Cold Sunder Charm and Cold Mastery for the Sorceress, I feel like there's a little bit of a potential for the Cold Sorceress to just completely rip. Now, we don't know item rarity drop yet. Like, this Cold Sunder Charm might be like Burrune or Jawrune rarity, and it might be worth like just a killer ton, but having negative Cold Mastery apply after you bring a Cold Immune to 95, you're pretty much just going to be like one-shotting everything with Blizzard. So it's just an interesting balancing act, because characters like the Wind Druid or Freezing Arrow, Frost Maiden, Boazon or whatever, they're going to get a big buff, and that's really nice. But at the same time, Cold Sorceress will, and that's largely just because of her Cold Mastery. So there's a little bit of concern I have there with damage output, but again, that could be scaled by maybe changing the Cold Mastery Sorceress skill, like reducing the value. But that is a concern that I have. The third concern is that I feel like magic isn't super beneficial. Like, if you're a Bone Necro, I would probably be rocking the Fire Sunder Charm to boost Corpse Explosion. There's just not really a ton of magic immunes in the game. Like, it will allow the Hammered In to clear wave 2 a little bit quicker, or the Foden, so there's a bit of improvement there, but there's not a ton of magic immunes in the game. So maybe if they added more magic immunes to Terror Zones, there might be more incentive to use the Magic Sunder Charm. And the final concern that I have is just the drop rate and rarity of these charms. I don't want to see them be like Tyrael's Might rare, but I definitely don't want to see them drop like, you know, like a Pole Rune or something. There should be like a nice in between. Like, I would say like Ohm to low, or maybe upwards of Burrune rarity would be nice, just because it would create a very cool sort of trading commodity around these charms. But that's basically everything I wanted to cover, guys. So a brief overview, some of my initial concerns. I'm going to do a lot of testing, so I'll be streaming live on Twitch and YouTube, so I'll be getting a chance to test all these charms. But let me know in the comment section below what you guys think, your initial thoughts. If you think I missed anything major, missed any concerns you guys have, just let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, if you could throw a like on it, that'd be awesome. I'll catch you guys on my next video or live stream. Peace out.